welcome to MASHmouth, a podcast covering every single episode of the hit 1970s sitcom MASH. I'm Ethan.
And I'm Vanessa.
Vanessa, how you doing today? You doing well?
Yeah, of course. I'm always doing well when we're talking about MASH, as I've said multiple times before.
Of course. It's the light of my life as well. But before we get into this episode, have you been watching anything or reading anything that is unrelated to MASH, just to show that we have a bit of a life outside of the show?
Yes, actually, I have been. So I've been reading Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, and it's so wild and so crazy. I love it. And I picked it up because, unfortunately, Anne Rice passed away just a couple weeks ago. And she was this really great, iconic writer. And I looked up what the book was about, and I fell in love with it. I was like, I have to get this. Yeah, so that's what I've been reading. And then I watched West Side Story last night, and wasn't crazy impressed, but it was pretty good.
I'm surprised that you don't like West Side Story. I mean, I haven't seen that movie yet, but literally every review, everything I've seen of that movie is like, it's a masterpiece. It's Spielberg at his best. It's Tony Kushner being like the best screenwriter that's ever existed. What was off about it?
So for me, it was, I didn't think the acting was like great. I can't even say that entirely. I didn't really care for Ansel Elgort in it. He wasn't great. And
I mean, that's understandable.
I thought that the pacing was a little bit off, but I have that. I feel that way about a lot of older musicals, that they're just a little bit too long and they don't do much to like drive the plot. But visually, it was really nice, and I think it was well directed. But also I have an issue being from New Jersey, I guess. I have an issue with fake New York accents, and everyone had a fake New York accent, and it was so annoying. It's just like, you don't have to do that. We understand that they're from New York. Like, we get it.
Visually, I've heard that there's an incredible shot of a puddle in that movie, and I don't know if you know exactly what everyone is referencing, but like, I want to see this movie just to see this puddle. And that's such a weird desire to have. Be like, I want to see the puddle. That's the $10 million shot right there.
The fact that that was what people were so hyped about is very weird to me, because it was very like throwaway. I mean, it was cool, but it was very throwaway. But anyway, what about you? Enough about West Side Story. What about you? What have you been reading or watching besides MASH?
I mean, I've been, I guess you could say, feeling nostalgic, blah. And I've been rewatching a lot of Adventure Time. And that show is so good. It's so weird. Early on in that show, it's a very different show than what it becomes. Because Adventure Time is one of those first, like, 2010s cartoons to be like, hey, what if we take ourselves really seriously and we have like this crazy storyline? But it starts out just being like a dumb, weird kid show. And seeing like the early days of that is so interesting, knowing that that show eventually takes itself a little too seriously. It's very strange. Have you ever seen Adventure Time?
No, I've never seen it. And like, I don't know, just something about it just seemed so strange to me. I was never really into cartoons after I got out of, being young. I mean, I feel like I am more now, but definitely not when I was like 13, 14.
And you're not a man-child like me?
No. Not that there's anything wrong with it, of course, but like, it just wasn't for me. And I feel like I can't go back and watch it now because it was such like a relic of its time.
Yeah, it's a very early 2010s kind of humor. It's very, like, internet-influenced, like, early YouTube. I greatly enjoy it, but I fully understand people who try to watch it in 2022 or whatever, and are like, this is incomprehensible.
It's just like, this is for its time period, and if you were outside of that time period, it's like, okay, well, maybe this isn't going to work for you.
Maybe. So let's get into this episode. This is a very big episode. This is a very important episode. This is this episode, Dear Dad, in which Hawkeye writes a letter back home to his father telling him just various things that have happened around the 4077th around Christmas time. This episode is first of many. There are many Dear Dad episodes, aren't there?
Yeah, so this episode is the first of 3, I'm pretty sure.
Only 3?
Yeah, and it actually carries into, I think the second or third season, they have, Dear Dad Part 1 and Dear Dad Part 2, and then in season 2 or 3, it's Dear Dad Part 3. So I always think it's really cool when a show that's supposed to be really insular, like a sitcom in the 1970s, does that cross-season, cross-series kind of referencing. Because you don't get that a lot. And I thought that this was really special.
Like I've said before, I've seen up to about season 4. And when I was watching it, they had like 2 or 3 Dear Dad episodes. And I think they had multiple in one season. Like I think there is another one
it's coming up in season 1. Yep, yeah.
So I assumed that it was just going to be a reoccurring thing throughout the entire series, these Dear Dad episodes, where the structure is a bit different. It's more vignette-y. It's more little scenes of little things that have happened rather than a major overarching storyline. And I just kind of assumed that throughout the 11th season of the show, that they would return to that more than 3. I'm surprised there's only 3.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this a little bit before, but if you go into the series kind of knowing that there's going to be these Dear Dad episodes, you can kind of watch the entire show through this lens that Hawkeye is just writing back to his dad about all of these things that have happened at the 4077. And obviously that's not the way that the show is created or how you're supposed to view it, but you can kind of do it that way. And I really like to do kind of watch old episodes as if Hawkeye's writing back to his dad, because I just think it kind of gives it a spin. And if you've seen it as many times as I have, it's kind of fun to do it that way.
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier, and I love that idea. I love little things like that where it doesn't necessarily change the entire show. Like, it doesn't make anything necessarily different, but it does kind of recontextualize how you experience it as a viewer.
Yeah, exactly.
Love stuff like that. That's my favorite kind of fan theory.
Yeah, definitely. It's really fun. And this episode is just, in general, I think pretty good, even though it doesn't have that kind of structured plot as we've seen up until this point. Do you want to kind of just get into each scene that Hawkeye talks to his dad about? Is that how you want to structure this episode?
Yes, I think that's the best method. This episode is kind of a spotlight episode for a bunch of little minor characters, not necessarily focused on Hawkeye and Trapper, although they get some story. There are pretty significant scenes where it's characters we haven't gotten a lot of yet. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so what I noted down right off the bat was that when Hawkeye kind of opens up the letter to his dad, he says that they're in this lull period where there hadn't been that much fighting. And I thought that that was really interesting because we haven't gotten a lull period up until this point, I'm pretty sure. We had gotten the storylines of so much fighting and day after day after day of surgery, but never a lull period. And it was really fun to see what the camp was doing in a period of not having to operate every single day, every single minute.
Especially at Christmas time, which this episode takes place at. It definitely is a cool look at the camp. We get a lot of first for this episode, which we'll get into. But right now, let's talk about the first little segment of this episode where Henry teaches the entire camp about sex education for some reason, because I guess that's a military mandate. Why not? What do you think about this a little bit? Actually,
before that, though, can we just address the fact that Radar is mailing home a Jeep for some reason?
Oh my god, yes, of course. I almost forgot.
So right before we get into the first little scene where Henry is teaching sex education for some weird reason, we get this just kind of preamble into Hawkeye's letter to his dad. And he says that Radar is just doing this old army bit, so apparently this is very common. I don't know, mailing home a Jeep. Yeah, I had no idea. It's so strange.
So I haven't done research, so if you're listening to this episode Don't quote me as fact. But this is one of those urban legends that may or may not be something that like genuinely happened, where I believe this particular little skit, I don't know what to call it, like this little bit with Radar is based on the idea that in World War II they would like send military families a Jeep, like you could get a Jeep for free from like the military, but the condition was that you had to build it yourself. So you just got like an army surplus box of just wheels and axles and like engine parts, and you had to put it together yourself. It's one of those things that may or may not be true. I haven't looked into it, but I believe that's where this idea comes from. And I love that Radar is doing that, because it also implies that like Radar thinks he can put a Jeep back together bit by bit. And I want to watch him do that. I think that'd be a fun little adventure to witness.
I mean, if Radar can take a Jeep apart, he can put it back together, right? Like, you know, maybe.
In theory.
In theory, yeah.
Assembly is much more difficult than deconstruction, if we're being honest. But I love this bit. This bit was really funny because it's like, what is he planning to even do with a military Jeep back home whenever he gets home?
I know, it's so crazy. And one other thing also before we get into more of the episode, there was this little continuity error that I don't know if you picked up on. Hawkeye references that it's almost Christmas, and he references that back home in Vermont, where his dad supposedly is, I feel like it's well known, but Hawkeye made reference to his dad living in Vermont, but he is from Crabapple Cove, Maine, in the rest of the series. So I thought that was a funny little continuity error.
Okay, so I actually didn't know that this was a continuity error. I just wanted to bring up the fact that I didn't know that he was from Vermont, but apparently he's not. He's dirty rotten liar for this episode.
That's funny that you thought he was actually from Vermont. No, it was just a continuity error.
Is it a continuity error if it's the first time it's brought up and then they decide to change it later?
I don't know. To me, it is.
That's what we call in the comic book industry a retcon.
Knowing Hawkeye's character so well, it was kind of jarring. I actually went back and I listened to it again. I was like, did he just say Vermont? Because I was like, he's from Maine. But yeah.
Maybe his dad is living in a retirement home or something in Vermont this week.
I mean, maybe they're vacationing.
You don't know.
Maybe he's vacationing in Vermont. Who knows?
So the first major scene in this episode, other than Radar mailing himself a Jeep, is Henry teaching the camp sex ed for some reason, and it having to be explicitly marital sex ed, which is a very 50s thing, and a very just American puritanical thing in general.
Yeah, I thought this was so funny because it was, what did they call it? It was like the monthly morality lecture. And the idea of Henry having to get up there and lecture the enlisted personnel about morality once a month is really funny to me.
Yes, it's an absurdist thing, and I hope that doesn't actually happen or didn't actually happen, because it's just so weird. It's such a weird concept that I hope that this was invented by a comedy writer's brain. And it's so fun. This segment for me is funny because of how much Henry just does not want to do it. He is just fully like, he can barely say the word sex, and he's just so like trying to get through it, and everybody is mocking him or like having their own little side tangents, and it's so, you can feel the awkwardness. This is a real case of cringe comedy from the 70s.
I felt so bad for Henry because you could see it. He was struggling so hard to get through this lecture because he did not want to give it. Especially it's funny because it's like, okay, it's supposed to be about marital sex, and you're only supposed to have sex with the person you're married with. Meanwhile, Henry's married, carrying on an affair with a nurse. Almost all of them are carrying on affairs at this point in the show. It's just so bad.
And, like, it doesn't make sense in general to give this marital sex speech to a bunch of enlisted officers, because it's like, are they supposed to get married while they're enlisted? Like, I know people do that, but, like, is that such a common thing that they're like, we have to teach this to all the 18-year-old recruits is like, hey, get married first and then worry about it. It's just so weird.
Yeah, I think it's more supposed to be like, if you're not married, you're not supposed to be having sex, even though you're in Korea and you're, risking your life. Just remember. But yeah, I thought it was really weird, though, that it was just supposed to be the enlisted personnel. It's just like, okay, why? You know what I mean? But you did make the point that it's the younger people.
But there are some good bits in this. Like, Henry has this big diagram of man and woman, A and B, and just the shenanigans that ensue, like trying to talk about this stick figure diagram, I thought was very good.
Yeah, Trapper said something along the lines of like, oh, like what if figure A is attracted to figure B, but figure B is married to figure C, and figure A is engaged to figure D, like stuff like that. It was a very funny play on words. I really liked it.
And then that ends with, oh, that figures, and it was like, it's a good punchline for that joke. And Frank and Margaret are also there for some reason, and Hawkeye is like joking around and, having a fun time. And Margaret's just like, oh, you dirty-minded fool. And meanwhile, like, she's also having an affair.
I know.
Like, during this marital sex seminar, she's the one judging other people who, as far as I'm aware, Hawkeye's not married and not having an affair with anyone. So, like, who's the bad guy here?
Yeah,
Margaret?
no, I know. And this hypocrisy, of course, carries over and continues. Okay, we've been talking about this for way too long now. So in the next scene, we get Hawkeye talking to his dad about Trapper. And I thought this was really cute because Hawkeye says that Trapper kind of made this, side business, but it's him kind of running a clinic and being on call for the locals. And you get this scene of
he gives a kid a vaccination,
yeah,
and it's like nice.
He's giving kids vaccines, and it's so cute. And then you get this local guy run up to Trapper, and he's like, "Come here!" And you think that there's this emergency, but he's just asking Trapper to like help deliver a cow, like a pregnant cow's calf. It's so cute.
Yes, this was. I like this one a lot. This episode has a lot more like down and dirty with like Korea, which we'll talk about a little later on with the end of this episode. But this episode has a bit more interaction outside of the camp than we typically get, at least so far in the series. And I quite liked that just Trapper is being a good doctor and like giving these kids vaccinations and like helping out in this like local community. It's like nice to see because it reminds you that like they're just good guys and they're pretty altruistic. Because he's not. They even say in the letter bit they're like, oh, he gets paid 75 smiles a day. Like he's not doing it for any payment. He's just doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I feel like more so because Trapper is like the sidekick to Hawkeye. You don't necessarily get a lot of he's like less redeemable, I feel, than Hawkeye sometimes. So I thought that
he's cheating on his wife.
Yeah, exactly. But I thought it was really sweet that he was helping out the kids because you get that humanity side too. Because Trapper has kids at home, and obviously he cares about doing well in Korea, or he wouldn't be doing it. He'd be like Frank Burns, but he's not, and I really enjoyed that.
I have to mention before we move on, because this scene was very short, we don't have a lot to talk about, that I was watching this with subtitles on, and when the old Korean man comes in to get Trapper to help, the subtitles just said, speaking in foreign language, and I'm like, you mean speaking in Korean? The language that he would be speaking in Korea? Why not include that in the information? Huh?
That's very strange. That's like super weird.
I hate when subtitles do that, when it's just somebody speaking a language other than English and it just says speaking in Spanish or speaking in a foreign language, and like meanwhile the thing they're saying is like, hello, how are you? It's like, you couldn't bother subtitling that? It's not a lot of work.
I know. Oh my gosh. So in the next little scene, we actually get, I think you made reference to this earlier on, but we get a little bit of side character kind of plot here, with Klinger and Father Mulcahy, and I really liked this.
Of Klinger.
Yes, this was great.
Again, in my notes when I saw Klinger, all caps was like Klinger. And what was weird about this segment was the idea of it is that Klinger's wearing this bandana, and Frank Burns wants him to take it off, and Father Mulcahy literally has to like talk down Klinger from like the ledge of throwing a grenade into Frank Burns' tent or something along those lines. We don't know exactly what he was going to do with that grenade, but Father Mulcahy has to talk him through it and say like, this is not what you're supposed to do. And I just find it so funny that Klinger's character becomes the guy who's like always in a dress, always out of uniform, never wearing uniform. And the entire conflict for this little segment is that Frank is mad that he's wearing a bandana while also wearing the rest of his male uniform clothing.
Yeah, I love the fact that it's like, okay, well, if you thought this was bad, you really haven't seen anything yet.
Get ready, bud.
I really liked this, though. First, I wanted to say that Frank is such a jerk, like always, because right before he told Klinger to take off the bandana, he told Hawkeye to shave, and you can get that it's just like Frank's need for control.
Yeah, and he has like just 5 o'clock shadow. It's like nothing.
Yeah, so Hawkeye basically tells him to like go screw because he's not going to shave, and then he starts in right after that on Klinger, and it's just so annoying. I just hated that. But then, of course, you get like the great interaction between Klinger and Father Mulcahy, and I wrote down in my notes, we stan Father Mulcahy because we absolutely do.
Oh yeah, he rules. I love him. Like, admittedly, in the stuff that I watch, you don't get a lot of good representation of like well-meaning religious characters. A lot of the things that I watch, they tend to be more on the not evil side, but more of like the morally ambiguous side, you know? So it's fun to watch this and have Father Mulcahy just be a good dude and be a good dude who happens to be religious. I really like him, and I really want to see more of him. Same with Klinger. I can't wait to see him evolve and become the character that he really is, because he's still kind of in beta form here. Like, he's not wearing a dress or anything. He's just wearing a bandana, and he's like, my mom gave me this bandana. She said never take it off. And then I don't think he ever wears that bandana again.
We love the continuity errors in this. But yeah, about Father Mulcahy, to what you were saying, to me, Father Mulcahy just symbolizes everything that a priest like should be. And I really love that. And throughout the show, he is just this force of good. And I love it. And as you watch the show, you'll find more of that, obviously. But he's not overbearing with his religious aspect, even though he is a priest. And I love it. And it's juxtaposed for laughs a lot of the time because, like, you know, he's this moral guy. He's a priest, but it's still really, really good. So I'm excited to get more into Father Mulcahy.
I really like the scene between him and Klinger while Klinger's holding the grenade. It wasn't like super high tension. It wasn't like you were like, is Klinger going to blow them all up? Yeah. Like, it was pretty clear that like this was going to de-escalate. But just the way they talked to each other was taken very seriously and like just very genuinely. And I really like that. That was a good interaction to have in the middle of this. You completely kind of understand Klinger in that moment because he's just like, he's burnt out, he's exhausted, and he's kind of, you know, losing touch a little bit. And Father Mulcahy just does a very good job of like talking him down and like working through it. And I really liked it. It was probably my favorite bit in the entire episode.
Yeah. Before we move on from this one, I just wanted to note that Jamie Farr, who plays Klinger, looks 10 years older in this scene than he does in the rest of the show, which is so strange. They must have dyed his hair.
Gray hair.
Yeah, they must have dyed his hair.
Yeah. I noticed that, but like I'm not as familiar with the show as you are. So I'm like, oh, is Klinger gray in the temples? But I guess he isn't.
No, not later on. It's really funny. Maybe because they didn't think that his character was going to stick around, but yeah.
So the next segment is Hawkeye retelling his father about how he messed up a date between Frank and Margaret. And this one was definitely more on the pure comedy side of things. But we also do get a little bit more depth to, I think, Margaret's character in particular, with one little moment that we'll get to soon enough. What do you think of this part?
I mean, it was funny to me. I think that a lot of the pranks with like Frank and Margaret are based around like humiliating and like sexually exploiting Margaret, and I don't like that, as I've mentioned before. But I thought that this one was actually just really funny. It was pretty just like pure. And Margaret has a line in this and she says, "Why can't they just leave us alone?" And I'm like, yeah, you're right, but also this is kind of funny.
Yeah, it wasn't like they were putting them on display or anything. They were just privately
like messing with
making
them.
their night a little weird.
Yeah.
The prank starts with Hawkeye and Trapper like replace a bunch of things in their tent, and the first thing that Frank and Margaret notice is that this candle, every time they blow it out, it just like relights. It's a trick candle, and like that's barely anything. Like that's barely annoying. They do more extreme things as it goes on, or they reveal more extreme things. But just having a candle not be able to go out is like barely a prank, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there's like pudding on Margaret's pillow, and for some reason
that pudding
that always stuck with me. Like I knew that was going to happen as I clicked on to watch this episode. I was like, this is the pudding on the pillow episode.
You lay your head down and you're like, whoa, why is it wet and weird? And you're like, oh,
gross.
It's pudding. When she pulled her hand up, I was like, oh, do they put blood on the pillow? And she's like, no, it's pudding. And it's like, oh, okay, sure, why not?
Oh, I love that.
This is also a segment where Frank says, why do Hawkeye and Trapper have to be so annoying? Why can't they leave us alone? And he just goes, they're like my wife. And Margaret not like fully breaks down, but just after a second's like, like cries, like no, like kind of realizing or reaffirming that they are having an affair. I thought Margaret's acting in that moment was actually very sad.
Yeah, so in that scene, she's kind of, even when Frank makes reference to his wife, it is kind of reaffirming that he is in fact married and they are in fact having an affair. She gets really upset, and that actually happens a lot throughout the show. Anytime Frank references his wife, Margaret gets really upset. And it's just like, well, stop having sex with a married man.
Frank.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an easy solution. It was like the first time that we're reminded as the audience that like, hey, this guy's married. Doesn't he turbo suck? Like, Frank is so bad. And I feel so bad for his wife. Because A, she's married to him, and B, a guy who's this lame isn't even faithful. Like, what the heck, dude?
That is literally so true. I can't wait till we get to... this is like... No, I'm not going to spoil it. Never mind. Don't worry. Along those same lines, though, in the very beginning of this scene, too, Margaret and Frank are talking about how there's, like, peace talks happening, and they get so upset because that's, like, the possibility of them, like, leaving each other. It's just like, oh my god, what is wrong with the two of you?
Did you hear that there's peace talks? And she's just like, oh, I'd never dream of it. And it's like, oh man, that is
It's just so on brand.
I know Margaret deserves better and she gets better, but oh man, she's not the greatest person in these early episodes.
Not in the first
she?
few episodes, for sure not. Remember how I said a lot of the pranks like are sexually exploitative of Margaret and I don't like them? And I thought that this one was funny. Well, it kind of ruined it for me afterwards because Hawkeye kind of just like grabbed Margaret and kissed her in like the next scene after the whole tent falls down on Frank and Margaret, which was genuinely very funny.
That's a very 70s joke, by the way. Just a thing falling down.
This happens a lot throughout the show. Too, where they're just like kind of grabbing Margaret and like pushing their tongues down her throat, and I just hate that. And even though a lot of the times, like sometimes she enjoys it, sometimes she doesn't, it's very gross to me and I don't particularly care for it. It's not my favorite thing. It wasn't like egregious in this particular scene, but I just really can't stand that.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from completely. I'm not even gonna try to argue with you otherwise, but for me, because she kind of clearly was like, really enjoyed it, like afterwards, she's like, oh my, that kind of saved it for me from being anything creepy. I just thought it was like a cute little moment, given like what, I thought it was cute. I'm just gonna be real.
No, yeah, definitely, like this one was definitely cuter. That more so than like other scenes, but compounding on top of like what I guess I know from the show, it just like makes me mad every time I see it, whether it's nice or whether it's cute. It just makes me like, oh my god, can we stop doing this please? But
to use modern parlance, or I don't know if that's the word, but made me picture like people who like ship Margaret and Hawkeye together. I was like, somebody used that as their fuel, didn't they?
But well, it's funny too because it's just like, okay, like that is cute for like people who do want to see them get together. It's just like that is cute, but it's just like, no.
Sure.
Then after that, we get the final scene of the show, like the final like situation. Where Hawkeye is dressing up as Santa Claus for the local kids that Trapper was taking care of earlier in the episode. And there was one line in this when the scene was first opening up where Trapper is putting this fake pillow into Hawkeye's Santa suit, and Hawkeye goes, if my father sees us like this, you'll have to marry me. Because it looks like he's very pregnant.
And
it's
Trapper
so funny.
just responds, I wouldn't marry you for $5.
I love that.
I love these bros being bros, no homo, am I right?
Oh my goodness. So as Hawkeye is walking out as Santa, Henry comes up to him and says that there's this wounded soldier on the battlefield and it's a chest case, and Hawkeye specializes in chest surgery, so Hawkeye has to go. No time to take off the Santa costume, and he just has to like go straight into battle essentially, or like onto the battlefield. Visually, it's pretty comical that Hawkeye is dropping down onto the battlefield from a helicopter dressed as Santa. But like for me, the laugh track, like not having a laugh track, made it really like somber and really serious, and especially with the bullets kind of, you know, ricocheting and the sound effects and whatnot. And you have this like Hawkeye is dressed as this, you know, kind of symbol of peace that's pretty well known, this like jolly, happy person during the holiday season, which is when you're supposed to be like spreading peace and joy and cheer, dropping onto the battlefield. And it's so kind of hard hitting in a not serious way. And I really liked how that was done.
I was going to ask you, actually, this is the first time that we actually see combat in this show, right? Like, we're never on the battlefield before this, I think.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure we're not.
So Hawkeye, you know, he's transported to this battle site in the Santa costume. And first of all, he legit, like, propels down from a rope, from a helicopter. And every time there's a helicopter in the show, I'm like, are they actually on a helicopter, like, flying in the air? Because that's dangerous. Like, every time I see him, I'm just like, that's dangerous. Don't do that. And then he's, like, army crawling to these wounded soldiers in this costume. And the soldiers are, like, making jokes like, you didn't believe in Santa Claus, blah, blah, blah. But it also just felt very real for, like, how how goofy the like you said, the imagery is, but it also felt like something that you would like see as like a trivia fact in like a newspaper or something. You know, somebody took this picture 50 years ago of this like doctor or soldier in a Santa costume in battle. It felt like one of those things that you would see happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well.
No, I understand what you mean. Yeah, definitely. I think that I definitely know what you mean. Like, this look at this crazy thing that actually happened during the Korean War, even though, you know, it didn't, but it feels like it could have almost.
Yeah, it feels like something you'd see as a piece of trivia. Be like,
Yeah.
oh, this happened on Christmas Eve, 1954, whatever. I'm making up a date. Where it's like Santa was deployed into battle.
Yeah, and I just, for me, again, like this scene just does a really good job of not being too on the nose, of juxtaposing, you know, the ideas that war is not good and that we should have peace. And I thought that this scene, while still being in very typical MASH fashion of funny, was still kind of being critical of the whole idea of war, and that, yeah, these people still have to fight a war during Christmas or, you know, any holiday, and not good. We shouldn't be engaging in that.
Yes, we always have to bring it down. We can never have fun on this show.
Yeah, I'm always the one who brings it down.
Talking about the horrors of war. I just thought it was funny that he was dressed up as Santa. No, I'm kidding. I also found the imagery very, very good, and I like these this interaction that the soldiers had when he's coming to them.
Yeah,
just keeping it somewhat light, and it was very, very tense to actually see a little bit of a battle. I don't know if we get that a lot, but again, I liked how this episode was a little more outside the camp than we usually get.
Yeah, definitely. So after that, really, it kind of just goes into final kind of credits. Like, there's really nothing that happens after that.
The credits ruled, actually.
It was really good, right? I loved
have to mention that the credits ruled. I love how, first of all, it's one of those beautiful cases where the name of the show is MASH, and MASH is like a real thing. So he gets to say, Merry Christmas from everybody in MASH, and then he says from Trapper and Henry and Radar, and while he's saying that, it cuts to all those actors with their names underneath, like end credits style, and I love that. I genuinely love that it was kind of meta, where it was saying Merry Christmas from the cast of MASH, but also Merry Christmas from the characters of MASH, like in universe. It was good. I like that a lot. That was like my favorite thing. As a credit nerd, I appreciated that.
Yeah, I really liked that as well. It was a lot of fun to see that, and I don't think that we really get that ever again. But it's fun. I don't know, like something about it just was not necessary, but also so good to have in there.
It ended on such a strong note.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Me too.
Do we have anything we want to mention before we kind of wrap up, move on to trivia, and conclude?
All I have to say is that in this episode, before Klinger and Father Mulcahy have their little scene right before Klinger fights with Frank, Hawkeye says to Frank, "You resemble an enema," and I laughed really hard. That was my favorite line.
I don't know if I have any favorite lines. This episode was very good. It was very well written. It was also written by Larry Gelbart and directed by producer Gene Reynolds, the main producer of the show. But this one didn't stick out to me, like, dialogue-wise. I was more like just kind of enjoying the actual storytelling than being like, oh, this is a snappy one-liner. But good episode. Do you have any trivia for us as we move on?
No, not really. Not in this episode. Only the fact that there was that pretty glaring continuity error of Hawkeye saying that his dad is in Vermont. Yeah, that was honestly the only thing. And also, when you look up this episode, it's the only thing that people talk about. It's like the continuity of him not being actually from Vermont, but Crabapple Cove.
Well, I love that the fan base for the show is still somewhat active, that there are people still debating these small things sometimes. I really enjoy it. Shout out to the MASH subreddit. I think those guys are really fun.
Yes, we love the MASH subreddit.
Because I want to know the demographics, but I also don't. I want it to be a mystery. I want to know if it's whether like it's 60-year-olds or a bunch of 20-year-olds who are just like watching the show. So to wrap up, we'd like to give thanks to Jacob Friar-Belko for being our technical consultant, Vanessa's sister Melissa for our cover art. Thank you very much. And of course, our listeners, links to our music and social media and where you can contact the show are in the description. And until next time, don't forget to wear a Santa suit into battle. Goodbye, farewell, and amen.
Bye, everyone.